Where, when you look back, would give you the most pride? Your flag was planted here. And that is the story that you're going to get to tell your children, your grandchildren, and might even be the legacy that's left behind when you're long and gone. And it's really simple, because if you start with the wrong perspective, you'll make the wrong choice. I'm not out to hurt anyone's feelings, but between politically correct or correct, I'll choose the last. Hello and welcome to the Chris F. Walker Podcast. I want to thank you for being here and joining me today. You know, this is episode 2, and with episode 2, what I'd like to do is I'd like to start by explaining the stories that I talked about in the last podcast. You see, I love to talk in stories. I love to share stories. And the reason why is because we can often have arguments and debates about topics. But what happens a lot of times is we're so personally attached to whatever the circumstance is that's causing this emotion that we don't always understand the reasons why people would have counter viewpoints. In fact, we often have that concept of if they only understood, or you don't get it because you're not in it. And some of that might be true sometimes. We certainly need to have a full perspective of everything. We need to have a complete understanding. But when it comes time to bring up controversial topics, I've often found that using a story is a way that can help remove the emotional attachment that people have to their circumstances, so they can start seeing the topics. They can start seeing the focal points of the conversation for what they are without the emotional attachment directly to it. So they start seeing it for what it is. They start trying to learn how to apply it. And then when they start turning around and that new viewpoint comes back on their life, sometimes that can create that aha moment. But the first thing that has to happen is they have to be willing to listen. And stories are a great way for people to listen. There is no better way to get someone's attention than to say these famous words, "Once upon a time." We love stories. It's built into us. In fact, for a long period of human history, there was no written history. There were only stories. We passed these lessons, these stories, down from generation to generation. It wasn't until the written word came about that we started really cataloging exact effects and information in history. But the point is that stories have been around for as long as humanity's existed. We've always told stories to each other. And a lot of times those stories are used to help create lessons. So with lessons in mind, I'd love to share one of my favorite stories that I love to tell. I call this the pedestal or the peak. Imagine that you're standing in a big valley. Throughout this valley, at common places, there are large towers. They're wider at the bottom, and they get smaller and smaller every level that you go up. Each level's tall enough for people to stand up, but there's only enough room to just barely reach the next level above. And it goes up and up and up, all the way until it gets to just one space. And when there's enough room for one person to stand at the top, then all there is up there is a pedestal. Now, all the people in this valley, they're fighting to get over top of each other and up to get to the top of that tower. They want to be at the pedestal. So what they're doing is they're continually looking for the people above them to not be paying attention, so that they can maybe reach up and grab one, pull them down. And that way there's room up there for them. And then they can try and climb up a little bit more. Sometimes they start forming little alliances, but the alliances are always determined by who can get who higher. And eventually those alliances have to start turning on each other as they get higher and higher up in the tower, because only one person can be at the top. And once you're that person at the top, all you have to do is watch everyone below you. You're never looking to gain advancement because there's nowhere else to go. So with that in mind, all that means is once you're the person who's at the top, all you got to do is keep everyone else below you. Well, if the goal of everyone trying to clamber over this stuff is to get as high as they can on the towers, then sometimes what we have to do is we have to take a step back from the whole situation, look at it, and realize some of the factors that are involved so that we can truly determine what's the best course of action. So for a moment, you take a step back. And now, instead of just seeing the towers and how you're going to try and climb up, you see that the tower's there, but so is another one over on the other side. And there's another one and another. There's a whole lot of towers down here in this valley. And everyone's clamoring to get over these towers. But take a step back again. What do you see now? You see now, what you're seeing are peaks. All the mountains around you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in a valley. So the question is, if we're just trying to get higher, then every one of those peaks towers over each one of these pedestals. And that becomes a different agenda now. Because instead of trying to clamber over all the crowds to get to the top of the tower, all we do is we pick a peak and we start off on our journey. Now, as we leave the crowds, as we leave the valley, the first thing we notice is that most of the hype has died away because everyone else is always fighting over those towers. Well, there's only a select few that actually leave the entire process and head towards the peaks. As you start making your way up the mountain, there's a lot of obstacles. You have to worry about dangerous terrain. You have to worry about the weather. You have to worry about whether or not you've got the right food and where is that food going to come from. All of the things that would come from climbing up this massive mountain are definitely obstacles. You're still going to be fighting. You're just not fighting against the crowds anymore. Now you're fighting against the mountain itself because obstacles are inevitable. So as you start making your way up the mountain, you may even start finding some other people who've stepped away from the crowds. They're starting to look up at the mountain. And as they look up at the mountain too, you realize you haven't found a competitor. You found an ally. Someone who's heading in the same direction you are and can help. Well, that's great because if you're both trying to get to the top of the mountain, it's not about fighting each other now. It's about fighting the mountain together. Which means that when you come to those obstacles, you can actually rely on each other. And the relationships that you build become more deep and intimate because you're actually trusting the other person. And you continue this process all the way up until you get to the top of the mountain. And at the top of the mountain, what a cool view you get to see. Because the first thing you'll notice is you can see the valley down there. But you know what you don't see anymore is the chaos of the crowds. You know it exists because you've seen it before. But now as far as the view goes, it's not even a consideration. And as you start looking around in all directions, you realize that there's unlimited mountains. There's a peak next to yours, and there's one behind that. As far as the horizon goes, there's no limitation to the mountains that can be climbed. And this mountain, even though you're on the top, has room left for more. What that means is if this is the mountain that you've decided is going to be where you spend your life, you now have the ability, because of your journey up the mountain, to go down and help bring other people up. Now, they might not want to be on top of your mountain. That's fine. Because by helping them learn how to navigate your mountain, you'll be teaching them the skills they need to navigate the next mountain. Because no matter how hard a mountain may be, there's only so many types of obstacles that they're going to have available. And the best part is, this mountain, you've basically conquered it. So what kind of pride do you get to have? It's not about the pride that you did to someone else. It's about the pride that you accomplished because of your overcoming obstacles. So your self-worth has a different perspective now. It is the mountains that we will face in our lives that will give us the most gratification. But there's a downside to this. Most people are still going to fight over those towers. You see, we can try and tell them all we want about the great view up on the mountain, but most people are convinced what they want is the pedestal. You see, if your focus is on the pedestal, then the only way to accomplish happiness and achieve success in your life is at the expense of other people. If you think about it this way, in order to become happy with the pedestal, you're going to have to hurt other people. And the joy that you get from the pedestal relies on those other people's view of you as they look up to you. But with the mountain, your accomplishments, the things you've been able to overcome, especially with the people. When it comes down to some of those obstacles, you know full well you wouldn't have been able to overcome them without the help of others. And then your happiness is not derived off of other people. Your happiness is derived off of the journey that you got to accomplish, off of the friendships that you built along the way, and off of knowing the kind of adventure you had, which other people don't even understand. So with the peaks and the pedestal, I want you guys to think about which one is your goal in life. Are you focusing on a pedestal, or are you stepped away from the crowds and heading for the peaks? Please don't forget to follow and review the show today. Also, head over and register at the chrisfwalker.com website. There you'll find links to the Indiegogo and Patreon campaigns, which help keep this show going. You'll also find links to the bookstore, gear shop, blog, and you'll stay up to date on upcoming events and live appearances. Now, let's get back to today's message. Welcome back. So I wanted to share right now that when I do a lot of coaching work, when people are trying to get perspective, one of the first things that I really look for is are they focused on what everyone else is focused on because it's what everyone else is focused on? Or are they truly going after what they have determined for themselves to be the true measure of success? You see, most of us have never taken the time to define for ourselves what success looks like. Everyone always thinks I have to have a certain number in my bank account. That's not true. If you had $10 million, I promise you'll still have problems and you'll still feel the desire for something more. Because the money is not the point. The money is a tool. But I will be the first one to argue, money helps. So you have to learn how to use these things. And that's kind of the concept of when we're focusing on a peak, sometimes when we hit some of those obstacles, what we're going to need in order to accomplish getting around those is going to be a type of monetary contribution. But it's usually far less than we always think. The first step is to step away from the crowds. Quit looking at what everyone else tells you success is. Do not focus on the pedestals that everyone's fighting for. Instead, ask yourself, which peak is it you want to be on at the end of your life? Where, when you look back, would give you the most pride of your accomplishments, that you accomplished this, you achieved this, your flag was planted here. And that is the story that you're going to get to tell your children, your grandchildren, and might even be the legacy that's left behind when you're long and gone. But it's got nothing to do with money. Money is always the pedestal. Because the only way to get money, think about this, the only way to get money is to get it from someone else. All money on the planet is owned by someone, somewhere. All you can do for money is try to convince people to give you some of theirs. Now, how you accomplish that is something that we can talk about later. But the point is, every dollar has an owner. Someone has it. In order to get it, you're going to have to get it from them. Now, I'm hoping you're doing it legitimately, because people will pay you money. You don't want to take it. You want them to give it in terms of value. We talk about that later. But saying that your goal is money is like saying that the body is alive to have blood. Blood is necessary for the body. It is a tool that is used by the body, and it is very vital that we pay attention when we're bleeding, because we got to stop it and make sure we treat it. But it's not the purpose. We're not alive to generate blood. If the only purpose of being alive was to be alive, then what makes us any different from like a salmon? You see, we as human beings are built with things like an imagination. We're built with things like problem-solving creativity. We have the ability to create on a scale far in excess of any other species on the planet. And I promise you, it was not for the purpose of getting money. So today, why don't you think to yourself, what is the peak I want to climb? And stop fighting for the pedestals. Everyone else is already fighting for that anyway. Odds are you're not going to win. Instead, what's the mountain you can climb, and what are the tools you're going to need along the way so we can start equipping ourselves for an adventure and a journey that we can look back on with pride. And it never hurt anyone. It inspired everyone. I realize your time is the most precious commodity you could possibly share with anyone. So I want to thank you again for spending some of yours here with me today. Don't forget to review the message for others. And be sure to follow the Chris F. Walker podcast for new releases. Remember, your generous support on sites like Indiegogo and Patreon are making this show possible. Don't forget to register at the chrisfwalker.com website for links to the bookstore, gear shop, and to stay updated for new events and appearances. I hope to see you again soon. God bless.